Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about brakes and rotors. These are pads and rotors, and specifically how to know when you need to change your brake pads and how to know especially how to change your brake rotors. Your brake pads are a little bit easier to tell, but your brake rotors, this big thing, it's a little bit harder to tell when it actually needs to be replaced and resurfaced, and we're going to talk about both in this video. But because I drive a Subaru WRX and I drive a performance car and a lot of my content is surrounding performance vehicles, we're not going to really talk about resurfacing rotors because ultimately if you want the best performance, you're going to go with a new rotor with a stock thickness, coating, etc. There's lots of different things, a lot of metallurgy involved in just material science, but I'll briefly touch upon it when we get into it. So we are going to be looking at the brake pads and the rotor of my 2016 Subaru WRX. These are the original brake pads and rotors that were on the car, so I've put quite a few miles on them and I just did a change. If you haven't already seen that video and you want to see how to change these on your own, go check that out. I'll link it above. But this video really applies to any car, and you don't need to necessarily be in your car, and I'll kind of walk you through that. But this should be a short video, and you guys should feel pretty confident on whether or not your car needs brakes. If you want to see more automotive content or WRX content, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, let's get straight into it. So I know that I'm sitting on my deck right now and we're going to look at my pads and rotors individually, but that's not what you're going to be doing if you're looking at your car. Now, the reason I'm not showing you on my car is one, I've just changed my brakes, and two, every car is slightly different depending on the wheels you have, the access. So if you want to be the most educated in what you're doing and how you're looking for mostly your rotors, you want to take your wheel off. So you want to put your car up on a jack stand or jack it up, take your wheel off and take a look. Pads are going to be easy. Let's talk about this real quick, and then we're going to actually look at the rotor itself, and you guys won't stare at me, and I'll show you the different things you can look at on the rotor to completely understand the rotor and when it might need to be replaced. So we'll take a zoomed in look at the pads themselves in a second, but what you need to know and what's important is you're not gonna be able to see your pads while they are on your car for most cars. Basically, that's the truth. You're gonna have to use some prior knowledge and a few techniques to understand whether or not your brake pads need to be replaced. And the first thing you can do is understand how long you've been driving on your current brake pads, and this is like this is an easy one. Hopefully it's easy. Brake pads are usually good for anywhere between 15 and 25,000 miles, depending on your braking and where you live in the country and all different types of, all different types of factors, but that's typically a range. So if you're never sure, make sure at 25,000 miles, you're considering at least changing your pads. On most pads, you've got something called a wear indicator. And it looks like this little thing that you guys can see, and we'll look at it a little bit sooner. And these things are going to squeak. Now, the second they start squeaking, you need to replace your brake pads, because if you lose too much of the surface of the pad itself, it can damage your rotor, and that's a whole nother conversation. So the few things that you can do just to start before we get too deep in here is understand how old your pads are, understand when they're squeaking and what's happening with your indicator. And if you notice any braking performance and deterioration, that's certainly one thing you can consider is brake pads. But if you want to get a little bit more exact about when your pads need to be replaced and you're not doing it every 20,000 miles, or when the thing squeaks on you, or you notice braking performance issues, the other thing you can do is turn your wheels on your front of your car and make an assumption on the front of your car, and you can take a peek and try to see what your thickness is. And again, I'll zoom this in for a second. These still have some thickness on them, and it's usually the one on the inside of the rotor where the piston of the caliper is actually pushing up against the rotor that gets eaten away fastest. Okay, so here we have the front brake pad for my 2016 Subaru WRX. Here we have the wear indicator. You can see it right here. Basically, when the pad gets to a certain level of thickness, it's going to hit this indicator, and it's going to start making some sound, and that's going to let you know that you need to replace these. But ideally, you're catching them right before that happens, or when that happens, you're getting these things out. I've actually got some damage on this one. You can see there's some grooving here. I needed to get these out anyways. I'm not really sure what caused the grooving in this instance. It's a little bit bizarre for a 2-piston brake that I've got. There was some damage, and it caused some damage on the rotor, which we'll look at in a second. But these things still have some decent thickness left on them, and we'll look for a second at the rear pad, which you can see here. This is actually the pad itself, and look at how thin that is. I mean, you can barely see material itself compared to this, right? Massive difference in thickness there. I actually didn't have on this side of the rear brake pads, I didn't have an indicator, but on the other side of the brake pads, I had an indicator, and that's what was making some noise for me, so that's what indicated that I had to do my brakes. But I knew that I had to get the rotors done because, and I'll explain in a second, the rotors had a lip. So these are what the pads look like. Easy to replace. I highly recommend, after 20, 30,000 miles of driving, get these things replaced anyways. Not much more to be said about pads, so these things are pretty easy. Let's move on to the rotors. The main point of this video was to talk about how to know when you need to change your rotors, because these seem to be more of the mystery. They can last for a long time, so if they can last for a long time, how do you know if you need to replace them? Because if they're good for 70,000 miles, it's not on all of our minds on a regular basis. Now, there's a couple of things that can happen. The first thing that can cause you to replace your rotors is if you've got some type of rotor warp, and you're gonna feel that as you drive. You're gonna have, like, you're gonna be driving, you might have wheel shake, you might have other things that might feel like some thumping, notice something as you're driving. Now, this is worst case scenario. This means you haven't gotten the full life out of your rotor and you have to replace it prematurely. There are other things this could be, so you need to understand what your car's been through. If you've hit a big pothole, your alignment's off, you've got a problem with your tire. A warped rotor is one of the things that can cause that, but that is a reason where you're gonna have to replace your warped rotor. Let's say it's been a perfect world, you've got 40, 50, 60,000 miles on your car and you're thinking about doing your brakes. Well, it's probably not a bad time to replace your rotor too, because if you're lucky, you might get 60 or 70,000 miles out of your rotor, but most rotors really need to be looked at 40, 50, 60,000 miles. Now, a lot of car manufacturers, especially in non-sports cars, will think about resurfacing your rotor. That is totally okay. You can resurface your rotor. We're really not going to talk about the difference too much about resurfacing versus replacement, but just know if you resurface your rotor, you are shaving down some of the material in the rotor, and if there's already damage on the rotor, it's just going to continue to kind of corrode. The greatest example, and we'll look at it shortly, is actually the back of my rotor has had some damage in cancerous areas and is starting to rust. So even if I were to resurface this, some of that existing cancer, let's call it cancer, is still there and it's going to eat away at the rotor. So even though I've resurfaced it and put it back on my car, it's a temporary measure. So with the cost of rotors being so cheap these days, my take is if you've got any kind of corrosion or you're at 50 or 60,000 miles on your rotors, just go ahead and replace them. It's going to cost you a little bit of money, but it's not too bad. And you know, again, the rotors are getting cheaper compared to the cost of resurfacing, and you'll know you'll get another 60 or 70,000 miles out of a new set of rotors. This is really what you guys are here for, and it's how to know when your rotor needs to get replaced. Now, I'll pick it up in a second, but it's super heavy, so I'll show you a few things before I pick it up. Basically, when I was making the decision whether I'm going to resurface or not, I'm looking for cancerous spots on the rotor or places of rust, and the perfect example is the back of it. I mean, like, this is just totally deteriorating on the inside. I live in New England. This is expected. I don't want to resurface this because that rust is not stopping. It's not getting removed, and it's just going to essentially infect the resurfaced material. So I've got bigger problems here, but the first thing that I can do from the exterior of the car to understand if I need a new rotor is, one, look for damage, but the rotor's hard to see. So the biggest thing that you're going to do when you know you might need a new rotor beyond the mileage, 60 or 70,000 miles for most cars, is feeling a lip on the edge. So the pads themselves sit like that in there, and they hit this middle section of the rotor itself. What it ends up doing is it doesn't hit the tip of the end, so you can actually understand whether this material is getting worn down. And for me, I had a lip, so it's hard to see. It's not terrible on this one, but when I ran my finger over this, there's a pretty big lip. It's enough that my finger stops, and I have to go up and over the lip. So that was enough for me to say, screw it, I'm going to put new rotors on my car. I've put 40,000, 43,000 miles on the car. These rotors maybe have another 15,000 miles on them if I'm lucky. Turns out, from the front looking, turns out they had a lot less. If you look at the back of the rotor, and this is how I know they have a lot less, this is actually where the pad that interacts with the piston directly pushes up against it. And you can tell that wore down much faster because it's actually making the contact braking, and it's actually really damaged the rotor, and I had no idea this was the case. So another reason to just go ahead and replace your rotors. I mean, you can I guess tell if you're resurfacing them, but if you buy the rotors in the first place and you have them with you, you don't have any downtime. This is hard to fix. We've got material chipping out here, and this is not me uninstalling. I took this off my car, if you can believe that. I was driving on this, so I knew I had to have my brakes replaced, but this is pretty bad. The last thing to illustrate here is, other than looking for damage on the rotor itself or seeing the damage from the pads, which could be another reason, I'm checking for the lip here. If this is on my car, I'm checking for the lip with my finger. And then, you know, I can illustrate it on the back here, but you could see this on the front. Physically grooved damage on the rotor. This might be on the front if it's really bad, and that's going to indicate you need to replace your rotors. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys now know how to tell if your pads and rotors, especially your rotors, need to get replaced. If you guys want to see more automotive content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, have a great day.